And we have an excellent cadre of three speakers to stimulate our thinking. We're going to start in a moment with Keith Williams, who's the CEO of British Airways. And we're going to run the session on time so that it'll be finishing 55 minutes from now. But given the size of the group here, I think that'll give us enough time to have opportunities for questions. So I'm not sure how many of you were familiar with this particular word, Aerotropolis, but what we're talking about here is how we can take infrastructure and mesh it with a whole host of services and technologies to create something that's much more than the traditional airport that you and I have been flying in and out of for decades. So let me stop there and perhaps just for the sake of efficiency, since we're starting a little bit late, just go straight to Keith and ask you to start off, please.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Let me start my story with British Airways in 1924. In 1924, we started our first international flight, and it flew from London to Paris. The reason I mention it is that London to Paris in those days cost 35 guineas. Now, guineas no longer exist, but it's the equivalent of sort of 36, 37 pounds or $50. The reason I mention that is that if you look today, you could travel to Paris for pretty much the same cost. So, the cost of air travel over the years has stayed pretty much the same, and in real terms has fallen. So the ability to attract more customers is clearly there. Now, if I then pick up the story to move from 1924, I'll move to 1932. In 1932, we flew our first service to the Middle East. We flew to Sharjah. And in those days, the flight to Sharjah took more than 2 days. The cruising speed of the aircraft was 100 miles an hour. So it took a pretty long time to make the distance. And by the way, we could only transport just over 20 passengers. So you can see today we've pretty much solved the problem of speed. In fact, at one point we used to fly Concorde to Bahrain. So some would say we more than conquered the quest of speed. And today, as British Airways, we fly to 68 destinations in the region. And, we're very proud to serve this region, including a flight today to Riyadh. Now, I believe that all stories should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So in the beginning, I'll talk about Aerotropolis. Then I'll talk about British Airways' experience in London, and in particular at Heathrow. And then I'll finish with some conclusions. So in terms of Aerotropolis, I think some people in the room might well have been responsible for the development of the Aerotropolis, and it's something that we would support. And there are different examples around the globe that exist today. For example, Seoul, Hong Kong, Dallas-Fort Worth, and Dubai World Central might well be viewed as the Aerotropolis of today. And in Saudi Arabia, you're developing King Abdullah Airport, which might well be viewed as the same. And today you have 3 international airports and a 4th major airport within the country. Now, these examples have a number of things, I think, in common. The first is the abundance of land, or suitable land. And the other major factor is the willingness of governments and government policy to develop rapid infrastructure change. Now, I regret to say that doesn't exist everywhere in the world. The utopian city is not always easy to start or to develop when there's already legacy infrastructure in place. So which comes first? the international airport or the commercial centre. What we see in reality is the two that are often developed together. But what is common to both is that the airport and the infrastructure attracts commerce and attracts growth. Now let me look at Heathrow, move on to look at London and look at Heathrow. Heathrow actually is one such example. Heathrow was opened in the 1940s, and of course the concept of Aerotropolis didn't exist in the 1940s. But over time, businesses have come to locate close to Heathrow for easy access to Heathrow's passenger and cargo services. And there's been extensive development between Heathrow and central London, with corporate giants such as GlaxoSmithKline, establishing its headquarters on the major link road between Heathrow and the city. There's also been the development of what's called the M4 corridor, which has seen major high-tech companies such as Intel, Vodafone, Panasonic, Microsoft, and many others locate close to Heathrow along the westbound motorway out of London and further north into the Thames Valley. In addition, the areas immediately around Heathrow have grown a number of ancillary aviation industries such as catering, freight forwarding, and logistics and distribution centres. Now, linked directly to London's M25 orbital motorway, Heathrow can be reached by motorway from all parts of the UK. And it's no coincidence that the airport has the second largest bus and central coast station anywhere in the UK, as well as a 15 to 20 minute rail link into London. So you can see that Heathrow has developed its links into the city over time. But there are limits to this kind of development. Because it is already surrounded by urban and suburban areas, Heathrow has not been allowed to spread beyond its current state. Crucially, Heathrow has been denied extra runway capacity. Heathrow today survives on 2 runways, while its close competitors further afield, at Paris-Charles de Gaulle and at Frankfurt there are 4 runways, and at Schiphol in Amsterdam there are 5 runways. So you can see that Heathrow has been falling behind in terms of development. With such a constrained hub, it's not surprising, therefore, that the UK has been fallen behind in the development of further trade links. So today, London is behind competition in the development of air routes to China, to Latin America, and other regions around the world, which will lead the global economies of the future. Already, there are 21 emerging market destinations that are not served at all from the UK, but have daily flights from other European hubs. Now, those of you who know such things might be familiar that the UK government actually announced the option of a 3rd runway at Heathrow in 2002. After 7 years and various consultations, it confirmed its view that the runway should go ahead. Unfortunately, the government changed, and when the new government came into office last year, it determined to cancel that project. So today, there is actually no plan for development of Heathrow. Now, that's despite the fact there's an increasing awareness in the UK that not to expand would damage the UK's prospects internationally as a trading and global economy. There is a plan led by Boris Johnson, who is the Mayor of London, and he flies the flag for a new idea, which is the development of a brand new hub airport, and that would be situated in the Thames estuary. Now, that is actually about 50 miles or 80 kilometres to the east of London. Now, starting from scratch, starting from a new beginning, you might think would create the opportunity to create a genuine 21st century Aerotropolis in the UK. But I wouldn't bet your house on it. In fact, I wouldn't bet your last real on it. There are many operational, financial, and environmental doubts as to whether that could actually happen. There has been talk of such an airport in the Thames estuary for the past 40 years, and no plans have yet come to fruition. And that's because the project would have several difficulties. One difficulty would be the necessary to build fast road and rail links from the Thames estuary into the centre of London. And that would mean travelling through some of the most densely populated parts of London City, and therefore in itself would create problems with terms of infrastructure. At the same time, there are unresolved issues around airspace design, bird strike risks, because the airport would be built in an estuary, which is occupied by bird life today, and the potential destruction of what is known as an internationally based wetland, which is a conservation area within the UK. Now, there's also cost. The cost of development of that Aerotropolis has been put at between 50 and 70 billion pounds, which would be one of the biggest aviation developments in the UK, against a backdrop where traditionally in the UK, airport infrastructure has been paid for by the airlines and not by government. And it's by no means certain that the airlines would come up with that 50 to 70 billion pounds necessary to make the development. At the same time, there'd need to be consideration of other aspects of the project. Now, I mentioned earlier that a lot of business had based itself to the west of London around the infrastructure that exists today at Heathrow, and a lot of that business would seek to move to the east of London, taking with them the population that exists in Western London today. So that's comments on London and Heathrow. But to end my story, let's just look at my conclusions. My conclusions are that British Airways is clearly in favour of the principle of the Aerotropolis in those parts of the world where it can be achieved. But I hope you'll forgive my note of caution with regards to London and regards to Heathrow, where the difficulties to overcome are potentially insurmountable. Thank you.
Okay. Keith, thanks very much. Could I just give you a quick follow-up, if I might? I think we all understand that Heathrow is not owned by BA. It's owned by a separate entity, and therefore you're in the unenviable position to some degree of the reputation of BA is sort of in a way linked to an organization and its performance that isn't really under your direct control. With respect to the Aerotropolis concept, given the constraints at Heathrow, what aspects of the Aerotropolis can actually be delivered at Heathrow in a constrained environment like that? And how can you do it in a way that helps boost BA and BA shareholder value?
Yeah. So, yes, by way of background, as exactly as you've said it, is that we're BA, and we frequently get confused with the BAA. The BAA runs the airport. So if you look at Terminal 5, for those of you who have been through Terminal 5 today, we don't actually own it. We occupy it, and we, in effect, rent the space there. Now, we're clearly dependent on the BAA for the delivery of services. And the way the regime works in the UK is that there is what's called a regulatory regime, and every 5 years the regulator sets out what the development plans will be for Heathrow and what will happen to the costs of the airlines of occupying Heathrow. So that's something that happens every 5 years, and the current regime is actually in discussion at the moment for the next 5-year review. Now, clearly as an airline, we want everything. We want good services, we want the best airport terminals, and we don't want to pay for it. And there's a balance to be struck. In terms of that balance, is what strikes me, as I said in my opening remarks, is that we've solved largely the issue of the cost of travel, to most people. We've solved the issue of speed. Where we haven't solved the issue of speed is the airport experience.
Yeah.
More and more of my customers today relate to the experience of getting through the airport than the actual air travel itself. The air travel itself is calming and people get the chance to rest. And most people view the trip through the terminal as being the most difficult part. Now, unfortunately, they associate that as being an experience of BA, not the BAA. And that, to me, is the challenge that we all have for the future, which is where I see the Aerotropolis has a great part to play in making the customer experience so much simpler and so much easier.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Keith. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go now to our second speaker, Wim Elfrink from Cisco. And, one of the great things about Cisco is that it's not just a technology company, it's a company that really embraces the customer in everything that it does. And, not all technology companies do that, but I know many of you will have seen and heard John Chambers, the founder and CEO here. He's a good friend of the GCF and of the Kingdom. But Wim has been with Cisco, I think, 14 years now, right? And, very interesting career. He's now Executive Vice President for Emerging Solutions and Chief Globalization Officer. And I think in 2007 you moved to Bangalore in India with your family, right? As part of the reinvention of Cisco to address emerging economies as a priority. So, this is really fascinating that we have Cisco represented here on this panel. So tell us a little bit about what we should know about the Aerotropolis of the future and how you're playing a part in that.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you, John. And thanks, Keith, for the introduction. Having lived 5 years in India, I'm a frequent traveler. And that's 700,000, 800,000 miles a year. And to be honest, BA is terrific if I can avoid Heathrow. let me stop there. Thanks for the opportunity. I want to, if you can look upwards, then I look to you. I'll use a couple of slides to make my story. This whole Global Competitiveness Forum is about innovation, about job creation. And I think the concept of Aerotropolis is a fantastic opportunity to think about the King Abdullah Airport, to think about Jeddah in the future as a main logistical hub in the world. And so I want to just give you some ideas, some statistics, and basically give you a roadmap from an airport terminal to an airport city to and through Aerotropolis. I will use a lot of work out of a book written by John Cassandra and John Lindsay. And they talk about 26 Aerotropolises today, 30 in development, and around 50 cities. They have criteria, they have classified it, and I'll use some information out of that. I helped them write the book, actually, John. So if the first slide comes up, will always take a while. I want to get one myth out of the way. Keith, as a technology company, when we launched Telepresence 6 years ago, that initially airline companies thought that we were going to compete and that we were going to reduce air travel. And what we've said is that no, we will add something, a new experience of meeting, of new business models. And basically, if the slide comes back, what you can see is that we enable new business models. And that in my period in India, we provide healthcare virtually. We provide education virtually. And you will see more and more that also in Aerotropolises, they use telepresence in the business class lounge. And when business people are in, that they can spend their time effectively and efficiently. And so 10 of the global airline companies are our customers, and there's no competition, Keith, can I say that? It really reinforces our product together, which is about an experience and a service. So, case study number 1, Memphis Airport. They have really built an Aerotropolis around logistics, transporting goods. And at the moment, a third of the value of goods transported go by air. It's only 1% of the weight. But, more and more you see fast, expensive goods going by airports. Memphis, and that is that for this seminar, competitiveness, that whole Aerotropolis concept is creating more than 200,000 jobs a year. And so we heard a lot about job creation and that big companies don't create jobs. Have a look at what FedEx has done here. In their, I would say, ecosystem, they have attracted more than 100 companies in Memphis, specialized in logistics, in supply chain, a university, and every one out of the 3 jobs in the region is now dedicated to this Aerotropolis. And from a GDP point of view, over the last couple of years, it has added $29 billion. So an excellent case study of creating jobs, innovation, and cluster type of industries. What I want to add on that is a concept that is happening today. And if you look at globalization over the last couple of centuries, it basically started when Columbus discovered America and when Vasco da Gama found the way to the east. And we started to trade. And we traded for hundreds of years via the sea, via ships. And then we got global manufacturing and we started to outsource manufacturing. Then we started to outsource R&D. And now with the demographic shifts, that's US is aging, Europe is aging and shrinking, Saudi Arabia is still getting younger, India is getting younger. And so if you look at your future potential of talent, young people, and people who still study math and engineering, and that you will see that now also what we call the corporate brain will globalize. And we had Jean-Pascal Tricoire here from Schneider, the CEO. And it's a German name, it's a French company, and Jean-Pascal is having his head office now in Hong Kong. And if you ask why Hong Kong, because of the facilities, the services, and the ease of doing business. And so you will see corporations driven by the attraction of services moving their headquarters around. And so it's not just physical food goods that flow, but you will also see services flowing around. On top of that, if you think what technology will enable, technology is never an objective, technology is a key enabler. That we passed last year, we have more connected devices in the world now than people. That we connected 7 billion devices. It's currently around 15, growing to 50 billion devices connected. And what that means is an enablement of new services. If you think about healthcare, monitor devices, in education, all industries will be connected and we will move to a connected world. And that are drivers for Aerotropolises. Because on one hand we have expansion of e-commerce, goods will be shipped via air, the physical flow, and on the other side it will enable new business models and new services. Airport in Frankfurt already has more than 40,000 patients. They have a clinic on the airport. And you will see Aerotropolises having additional services to attract business and to differentiate themselves from other airports. Dubai has 1 billion in retail shopping. So you will see now not only the physical flow of goods and services developed in Aerotropolises, but also services around the brains, about healthcare, about education. And Aerotropolises will be cities in itself. So this is the roadmap from a terminal to a city to an Aerotropolis. There are some definitions, I don't go into details here, but it's basically the addition of services that defines the concept of an Aerotropolis. And it's very simple. It goes from just an experience going in the terminal, out the terminal, to additional services, desks, but access to healthcare, access to communication, and then clusters, like we had the plan in Saudi Arabia around the economic cities, the Medina knowledge cities, and that you form clusters around that. And when you have that integrated plan, you talk about an Aerotropolis. And these are these type of services menus. It's also additional revenue that you generate in an airport that you can give better fees to the airliners. It should be a self-sustaining and supporting model to increase the experience of the travelers. So, in closing, that if you look on the opportunities that we have, by air today, a third, like I said, of the world value in goods goes via airports. It's only 1% of the weight. And so it's the top end. 1 trillion is the total estimation. If you look at the growth, you're in a fantastic industry, Keith. The growth is spectacular. That we talk by 2050 around 16 billion passengers. And a quarter alone will come out of India and China. And India still has to be developed. The point I want to make is that to attract them in your airports, you have to provide the services. And you have to think holistically between a city and the airport. Amsterdam has done that concept. And by that, Amsterdam was able to attract more than 120 new companies last year. The headquarters, the brains, and not just the physical goods. So embrace that concept. Have a look. The King Abdullah city is at the moment developing a plan for an airport city. Perhaps we should leapfrog in Saudi Arabia and embrace that concept. If you look at Jeddah, also logistically with the port, if you think about logistics flows 20, 30 years out, we have to think in master planning. So what cities want is industrial competitiveness. My statement is that the future of competition is not between countries. Countries enable. Cities will compete. It will be London versus Mumbai financially. It will be Bangalore against Silicon Valley. It could be Skolkovo, a new city being built. And Jeddah as a port against Rotterdam, by the way, the city where I was born. But competition is key. So what cities require is an infrastructure, Aerotropolis, that can give speed, that can give agility, and that can give accessibility. Thanks for your attention.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Wim. Just one question that comes to my mind, if I may, and that is, I think we can understand the vision of the Aerotropolis being applicable when you have a blank slate of open space and a government that has good control over space deployment and utilization. But there are many hundreds, if not thousands, of airports in the world that are already in existence. And going back a little bit to Keith's problem at Heathrow, what elements of how much of the Aerotropolis concept can, in your view, be retrofitted into existing infrastructure, as opposed to, we understand it's a wonderful thing if you're starting from scratch.
Yeah, of course, greenfield is ideal to get started because you can look at the physical flows. I think, a lot of European airports, and I would say brownfield airports in general, if they would segment, and London, for instance, would segment the financial world, and they would go for the quality piece and what I call the corporate brain piece, and that's already in Beijing. And there are a lot of banks in the airport,
right,
which are enabled. And so it's not just a matter that it's only volume and physical goods. If you segment in that corporate brain and you say, what is the differentiation of the city? Mm-hmm. And you combine that then with the facilities and the services that you provide in the airport, with the enormous knowledge.
Okay. So if I've got right what you're saying, then you're saying if you've got a constrained space, you could basically let the low-price traffic go off to another location and use the constrained space that you have to focus on the corporate market, the higher-end market, and provide a full suite of services in that constrained space to that upper-end segment.
And that could be, like I said, financial services, educational services.
Understood,
Universities on an airport.
Right.
Virtually, physically come together. You can, like Amsterdam, focus on headquarters.
Right.
And get the
I've
corporate
always been impressed that there's a casino at Schiphol as well. That's always
There
tempted
is a
me.
library, a casino, and a museum.
Okay.
And that
All right.
belongs to Amsterdam, and that is differentiating.
Okay, that's like 3 life passages all built into one airport, right? Now let's go to Jeff Nugent. Jeff's professor of economics and business at University of Southern California. He's a very good friend of the Middle East, having been on the board of directors and a past president of the Middle East Economic Association. So he's done a lot of work out in this region. He's also worked for the UN, the World Bank, the IMF, and all of those other entities that are not solving our problems right now. But maybe that's an unfair editorial comment. But why don't you speak to the big picture here, Jeff? How do you see this? You've got a few slides, I think.
Yeah, a couple. So thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be here with a very distinguished panel. So let me just put a picture. So Wim already mentioned...
Just hold the mic up if you could, yeah.
Closer.
Yeah.
About John Casardo's concept in this term, Aerotropolis. And this picture, I think, shows you what this idea is a little bit more graphically. Whereas this is pictured with the airport actually right in the center of the city. And then around it, you have universities, you have storage places, you have sports facilities, you have entertainment venues, and all of these things, science labs, wholesale markets for tourist shoppers and the like, and perhaps health facilities for health tourism. So everything done with the airport being the center. Now that was a sort of stylized way. Wim also discussed a lot of other cases where sometimes it starts different ways. The airport is there, and then they build something around it, and so on. So the evolution can be quite different. I wanted to just mention, however, some aspects of the Aerotropolis which make it a little different in terms of entrepreneurship from things that we've been talking about the last couple of days, with the entrepreneur and all this. So the Aerotropolis was viewed in Casardo's terms as a transportation complex, a complex one, that would be more related to international transport than to the hinterland immediately around it. So in other words, quite a contrast from the railroad age or the port age, which were typically feeding the hinterland right around the airport. So, but this is going from one city or one country or one continent to another. So this is, I think, a distinguishing characteristic. Now, common among this set of recognized Aerotropolis, not surprisingly, you have the Singapores, you have the Hong Kongs, the Songdo airport complex near Seoul, Korea. But here in the region, we have a number: Dubai, Abu Dhabi, we have Jeddah coming up, some that are sort of in this category in Saudi Arabia, and Doha in Qatar. So these are important developments. So this region is very important in this Aerotropolis complex. Now, I'm a development economist, and so I've always been dealing with various strategies of economic development that have been practiced sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully in different parts of the world. But this clearly is a development strategy, particular development strategy that seems to have tremendous payoff from the examples that have been cited. So I would see it in economic terms as a way to jump from a low-level equilibrium trap to something much higher, and a dynamic force that can lead you into high technology and skip sort of various stages of development. So it can be all sorts of job-creating industries develop around this complex. Cargo, logistics, healthcare, entertainment, universities, research, hotels, office space, and the like. They're also vehicles for liberalizing domestically. So I think it's been already mentioned that really you're going to be successful in this. You're going to have to relax a lot of the constraints, the institutional constraints that have existed on other airports, on other businesses, and the like. So that reform is a very important part of the future. So one thing about the character, however, of this, that, again, very different from this entrepreneurial aspect, these are big deals. This involves huge investments, and the huge investments, therefore, are clearly much more risky than the Babson strategy that was presented about, well, you don't really need to take risks as an entrepreneur. You do what you can afford, and you're not really you're minimizing risk. But these can be, because of the size, magnitudes of the investments involved, there can be huge risks, and timing and sequencing and getting all the operations correct can be very important. So now the Dubai example I'd like to cite as an example from here in the region. So this is showing one of the key advantages of this is the Emirates airline. It's a traffic pattern feeding virtually all over the world now, and this is typical also of the other airports in the region, Doha, Abu Dhabi, and others to come. So it has some other advantages, unlike Chicago and London that can have some traffic problems because of weather. There's very little constraint in that respect. They're greenfields developments, so you didn't have this problem of old infrastructure and having to deal with tearing down what was there before. Some just patterns that where the Dubai example fits into very nicely is that worldwide traffic patterns, that this is demand for international travel is something that has an income elasticity of demand, as we call it in economic terms, that's greater than one. So it's rising worldwide, but the biggest growth is in terms of intercontinental travel. And that's where it seems to me a hub like in the Gulf here, or hubs in the Gulf, have a real payoff because they can reach these different parts of the world all in one trip with the new planes, the large planes. And the globalization that was talked about as this process that we're in really is feeding into that. So this long-term, you're not trading with your next-door neighbor, you're not trading with even the country next to you, you're trading across continents, and businesses are dealing across continents. So this globalization pattern is definitely feeding into this. It should be recognized that the present situation in Emirates Airlines and Qatar Airlines, these are really recent developments. Emirates started in 1985, Qatar Airways in 1993, and Etihad in Abu Dhabi in 2003. These are very recent developments, and we should recognize that before this, there was a problem. There had been BA and Lufthansa and Middle East Airlines and other airlines of the region were serving this area, but they had a long downfall in the 1980s, 1990s. They had a long-term decline in many respects. So these are new developments coming out of what had been a shrinking market with economic decline, with low oil prices and also conflicts that had hit the region. But just to give you on the airline side, just to give you some idea of the expansion, let me just cite some numbers. Emirates Airline clearly right now has 147 aircraft, mostly large, serving all these continents. They have 193 aircraft on order. Qatar has 104 and 132 on order. Etihad has 64 and 102 on order. So the scale of expansion of these airlines, the big three of the Gulf, let alone Saudi and Saudi Arabia and other airlines, is really astonishing. Very, very rapid growth being forecasted. So the various strengths that we see for these Gulf centers, their ability to feed these long distances with aircraft that are large. These airlines are not indebted for the most part. Emirates is making big profits every year. They've only had 1 year of negative profits. The other ones that started later have become profitable very recently, or in this coming year they're expected to be profitable. They have airports that are world-class airports and low cost in terms of airport charges and the like. They have favorable regulatory and political frameworks that facilitate it. Their geographic location, I've already mentioned. The institutional aspects, this freedom of the institutions. So Dubai, again, is an example of all those kinds of industries that you see have developed in Dubai, the universities, the science parks, the entertainment area, the manufacturing industry, each one with a kind of zone with its own institutional rules designed by the people using those rules. So this is, I think, a really unusual factor that's very favorable to Dubai and I think is being copied around the rest of the world. I will stop, but I do see in terms of there are threats on the horizon, which I think we should recognize. Possibility of overbuilding, these are too many airliners coming into existence, copying of pretty much largely the same thing in a lot of the cities, as opposed to diversifying. And of course, I think the most serious threat of all is the threat of security to the region. In the past, for example, Middle East Airlines, that was in Beirut, that was a hub at one time. A lot of its fleet were destroyed by external invasion and attack, and then also the oil price plunge really hurt a lot of these airlines and airport hubs of the past.
Okay, all right, Jeff, thanks very much. Look, I think, one of the things we need to tackle here is the funding issue, the funding model for these things. Keith alluded to it in respect of Heathrow. I'm not sure what percentage of the airport's revenue come from landing fees and passenger fees that are passed through to customers by the airlines. But I would guess it's about 70% of the operating costs of Heathrow. And in the US, exactly the same model exists. In other words, the bulk of an airport's operating expenses are covered by landing fees and passenger charges that are passed through to the consumer or to the freight forwarder. So, we're talking here about a model that is almost like a city-state model where you've got an economy and a government that has, a massive amount of cash at its disposal to do something spectacular. But, the run-of-the-mill airport can't fall into this camp, can it, Keith?
Yeah, I think they made a very good point, actually, which is that airports can be funded in two ways. They can be funded through direct passenger costs, or what I call indirect passenger costs. So people can spend money in the terminals, and that, in its own way, can help pay for those terminals.
Right.
And the better the infrastructure, the better the chance that people will spend their money. Equally, you need to attract people through those hubs. So if you take Heathrow, Heathrow today, or British Airways at Heathrow, around 60% of the traffic that we transport is what they call point-to-point, so it's direct traffic. But equally, around 40% of that traffic is consumers that come, or customers that come through Heathrow, and will spend their money while they're waiting to get onto their next flight to their destination.
Right.
And the challenge is to attract as many of those customers as you can bring in, because they will help support the infrastructure of the airport.
Right, and that hub is good for you as well as for British Airports Authority, right?
Oh yeah, that's good.
Absolutely. So one of the metrics that's used in this business quite a bit is revenue per enplaned passenger, right? So every passenger that passes through the airport, you want to maximize the revenue generated from that passenger. And so let me go back to you then again, Wim, because a lot of what you're talking about is really designed to enable airports to do that, right? To maximize the revenue per enplaned passenger. And if you can do that, it means the airport is less dependent upon fees coming from the airlines, which from a business model point of view is good because the airlines, they don't go away, but they're really very margin constrained. A lot of them are not so profitable. The ones in this region are, but a lot are not profitable. So if you can put in these services as an airport, you can diversify your revenue streams.
If I may comment on that, John. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Wim.
So master planning, and then not, of course, that airports have a history, and they were built to accommodate airplanes. But in that whole concept of the Aerotropolis, you start thinking about clusters, about economic segments, and by that, we have identified already more than 100 services that you can monetize via passengers, but also via external companies who have an interest to be related in an ecosystem with these passengers. Headquarter functions, like I said, healthcare. And so if you integrate that plan and you really make an Aerotropolis type of plan between the city and the airport and the clusters around that, you get an enormous opportunity to reduce the cost of infrastructure.
Right.
And by that, serve your passengers better. Because
Right.
that's the ultimate goal.
Right.
Customer satisfaction and get more customers through your terminal.
Yeah.
And we have cases.
I think it's also important just to underscore the Aerotropolis does not steal anything from the domestic economy because all of these passengers passing through, or almost all, are likely to be plus passengers,
or
right?
the goods. If you have the space, like the example I showed from Memphis, where it's about the high value, volume goods. Like I said, a third from the value, a percentage of the weight globally. And that's an enormous boost for economy.
Right.
It creates jobs, it drives innovation, and the market is only growing.
All right.
16 billion passengers, 1,300% growth in goods.
All right, let's see if there are a couple of questions quickly. We've got about 6 or 7 minutes left. Anyone like to ask a question or make a comment? Let's see if we can take 2 or 3, so keep it brief if you could. We'll take you, sir, first, if we can give him the mic. Right behind you, right behind you. The mic is coming. No. Yes, sir, you.
Thank you. My name is Bright Simons and I'm from Ghana. I just wanted to make a quick point in follow-up to what Mr. Elfrink said about cities becoming the main competitive nodes in the global economy. And I wanted to ask whether it's not really corridors as opposed to cities, because more and more we are seeing people commuting into the city, businesses happening in the periphery, etc. And whether if it is corridors rather than cities, then shouldn't airports begin to do the same? We've seen Seoul airports quite a distance from the city and the rest of it. And that is obviously in connection to Mr. Williams' point about the Thames estuary not being such a good location.
Okay, thank you.
Quick comment. I couldn't agree more. For simplicity, I talk about cities. You should think in communities. Because when everything becomes connected, in Africa, you see the same in India, where small villages are more and more connected to the cities. Via technology, you can enable healthcare, education, and you can bring work out to villages. And so we think in that bigger concept in the next decades, not just in the cities, we think in communities, where you have a central city with a community of villages. And the beauty of technology, you can enable the same services in the villages as that you can consume in the cities. So communities is my real answer.
Okay, I think there was another question in the center. Let's take the gentleman in the glasses first. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, it's regarding your comment, Keith, on the price of an airline ticket back in whatever it was, 30 guineas in 24, and in 1924, and the fact that it's still the same. What are the economic reasons for that? I mean, where did it go? Was it economies of scale? Was it absorbed by economies? Where did that difference go? And it's so stark from anything else that actually exists in the planet.
Yeah, on the whole, the airlines aren't making any more money than they were then, so it's not gone in profits to the airlines. So I think what you've seen is economies of scale, which can result from a number of things, actually. And I look at more recently. If I look at more recent experience, is that what the airlines have been successful in doing on the whole is managing to take costs out of the industry. A lot of that has been in terms of technology being a great enabler in two ways. One is it's reduced the distribution costs. The other is it's reduced the costs of service of the customer. So if I take Heathrow as an example, is that when we moved into Terminal 5, or just before we moved into Terminal 5 at Heathrow, we employed 8,800 people to do various jobs at Heathrow. With the introduction of T5 and much greater use of technology, we were able to reduce the workforce at Heathrow down to 5,500. And at the same time, the customer experience has improved. The baggage performance has improved. The whole operational and punctuality has improved. So it's a case of the airlines taking out costs. Some of that cost has obviously been taken by the costs of fuel. But against that, we're seeing more efficient aircraft today, both in terms of fuel consumption and in terms of environmental performance of aircraft, in terms of noise footprint. So what you're seeing is the industry continuing to change and drive out cost. And that's been to the benefit of the consumer. And at the same time, as the market has grown, that has enables economies of scale. Will that continue into the future? My guess is it will continue further into the future. And it might need some airline consolidation to achieve further economies of scale. But that's my guess of what will happen going forward.
All right, let's take one more question. The gentleman straight in front of me. Behind you, sir. Thanks. Sorry.
Yes.
He was first.
My name is Sultan. I wanted to ask about, in the theory, what is the ideal distance between these hubs? I mean, like Doha and Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Could they all coexist together? Mm-hmm. And the other thing is about, other question is about regarding sound pollution. I mean, if there are clusters near these airports or these hubs, are you worried about sound pollution or regulations?
Good questions. Thank you. Jeff?
Okay.
Can those three coexist?
So that was one of my questions at the end I didn't really get to, but the threat of, to the extent that they're competing for exactly the same thing. But they are, of course, different cities. They each have different populations, large populations. They're importing workers from various places. They're businessmen passing through. So, and to the extent that they wind up, I think that the saving grace so far is that it looks like they're diversifying a little bit. They're not exactly copying. For example, Abu Dhabi is moving in terms of these other industries in the city. it's going into the arts, whereas like Dubai is into athletics and entertainment. A lot of the other features are the same, and I would agree that it could be like the old days when these same city-states were all producing petrochemicals, competing with each other. We're all producing, at least many of them had their oil refineries that they're trying to sell products from, shipbuilding, and a lot of these same industries. So potentially it has, that scares me, but I think we're seeing enough diversification to make it not so threatening at the present time.
Jeff, why is it that most of these aerotropolises that we see today are in city-states and not in cities in big countries?
Well, I think, number one, it means that it is a city. You have to do everything there. It's not like you're having a railroad that you're shipping something inland, and that other city will supply all of these things. So it's providing a kind of natural boundary.
Yeah.
I think that's a large part.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take, gentlemen, one last quick one, if we may, and then we're going to have to move to the next session. Go ahead.
So this question is for Keith, actually. So what do you think about the competition for BA from the likes of Emirates, Etihad, and Qatar Airways? Because today you don't have the resources that these airlines are backed by the governments of their countries, yet they are taking away passengers from you when a traveler goes from India to London through Dubai. So how do you see that in the future, next 5, 10, or 15 years?
Yeah, and if I look at it, is that we've in the UK have had Emirates as competition since Emirates started, so it's existed for quite a long time, and obviously that competition is growing over time. What we need to do is obviously to respond to that competition, and that in part is going back to why Heathrow and London is important, because that's BA's home base. With all the things we've been talking about here, the better that you can make London and the airport at London compete, the better the end result will be for British Airways. But competition, it always exists. If it wasn't the Middle Eastern carriers, it would be from somewhere else. So, not afraid of the competition. What we need to do is to respond to it.
I think we've got to count it. Yeah. Okay, Keith, thanks again. I want to thank Keith, Jeff, and Vim, and appreciate all of you for supporting the session as well. Thank you. Okay.